You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. This is your summer survival guide. Here's your host, Ryan Argenta.
All right, the band is back. Shawn, Kellett, Frank Wedding of the scheduling committee, Lisa Nydahl, flight time, duty time. This is your summer survival guide. The summer is going to be hellacious. We're going to see the typical stuff. We've had a 3-part series on scheduling, fatigue, rotation, construction. That was kind of high-level philosophical stuff, talking about what we need to negotiate in our next contract for quality of life. This is your in the moment, you're flying the schedule, your survival guide to getting through the summer. Reroutes, extensions, fatigue. We've got it all here. Ladies, gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be back.
Thanks for having me.
I want to kick it off. What are you seeing for this summer? What are you expecting? What are you hearing?
I think the biggest thing that we're seeing is currently, and then I'll bring it over to what we're going to see in the summer, is that what used to be shoulder months, meaning kind of downtime between the holiday seasons and summer when the flying used to be reduced, there are no more shoulder months. So every single month seems to be just as busy as the previous month and just as busy as the holidays and just as busy as the summer. So it's no surprise that staffing is driving some of the issues as well that we're seeing. Premium pay and premium rotations are at an all-time record high, to where just a couple months ago, we had 16,000, almost 400 green slip duty periods, which is the highest that we've ever seen in the history of Delta Airlines, including month over month and year over year. So I think what we're going to continue to see is staffing is going to continue to be a problem system wide. That is going to drive busier summer schedules. I think you're going to see higher ALVs if the new TLV window will actually reduce that a little bit, which helps us as pilots. And I think it's going to get, frankly, uglier than it is right now.
Our premium trip's a good thing. We all like green slips, but where does that end? Where's the boundary here?
Yeah, I think if you ask 5 different people, you're going to get 5 different answers. So from a pay perspective, it's good, right? Because if you're a reserve pilot, you get single pay above the reserve guarantee. If you're a regular pilot, you get double pay. So from a pay perspective, it's a good thing. From a staffing perspective, it's good because premium pay, anytime premium pay, whether you're talking green slips, inverse assignments, that goes right back into the PWA section 22C pilot staffing formula. So every time, and it's the same with reserve utilization, anytime there's a premium pay trip awarded to a pilot, that also goes back in the staffing formula. It's not 1 for 1, but for just ladies and gentlemen's math, it essentially adds 1 pilot whenever you fly a premium pay trip. But the reality is this, that if you look at the trend and every one of it's all on the MEC website, if anybody is interested, it's called the Bid Monitor Report. And if you look at the trend over the last 5-10 years, and it goes all the way back to the early 90s, and you can see where it used to be, it's every single bid period where there were 2 or 3 green slips to now there's tens of thousands of green slips in the different categories. The airline was not meant to run on 17,000 green slips. It wasn't meant to run at the minimum staffing. But I think overall for pay, it's a good thing, but for just running at redline and beyond, I think it's not a good thing for the overall pilot group. It can be very fatiguing as well. You know, pilots are going to be picking up so much flying that everybody's going to be tired and it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I agree. And so operating at that red line has become the new normal. So again, this is the summer survival guide. This is to get you through so that you can enjoy some of your summer, to enjoy some of that quality of life. And this is the sticky part of now I'm fatigued. I'm overworked. What do I do? You mentioned the MEC website, the scheduling committee website. I want to draw attention to that. The scheduling reference handbook is kind of the dummy's guide to the PWA scheduling section. I like it. You mentioned in last podcast that it's actually a compliant document. If you cite the scheduling reference handbook, the company must abide by that.
As well as the schedule alerts. They're all vetted through the company. Every scheduling alert is vetted through the company. So if you talk to the company and you reference a scheduling alert, the company's got to abide by it.
That's great to know. I didn't actually realize that. It's like every time you guys come in, we get great nuggets. And I want to say, I know this is a podcast, but the sock game in this room is on point. Everybody's got great socks on. Okay. And then back to your website, you have an index of alerts.
Correct.
So you don't even have to scour your inbox or the website for this. You go to the scheduling website and you have an index of alerts, which I find is very handy. Plug here again, Ace for Unions app. I think we're all familiar with that. That seems like an after the fact thing, right? You've been screwed and now you report, but you brought up the Ace inquiry function of the Ace for Union apps. Talk about that, because that sounds awesome.
So inquiry function is basically, I don't want to call it real time, but it is a chat function of the app. You submit a question to us that you need an answer to. And if it's normal business hours, then it is actually a live chat because there'll be somebody there replying to you back and forth. Since we're not manned 24/7, if you send us the text in the evening or on the weekend, we get in on the next morning or Monday morning. We'll reply back to you. We can have a conversation, and we will take you through the beginning to the end of that chat. We're averaging about 42 a day right now. So it's a pretty good number, and it's going to continue to go up.
So it's kind of like using your iPad to chat with, or your phone to chat with a scheduling committee representative, right? It's what we use Pilot Assist or Crew Assist for. You can chat back and forth with them. So if it's Tuesday morning and I'm rerouted and I'm questioning this reroute, I haven't flown it yet, I can jump on the ACE for Unions app, an ACE inquiry, get in the queue, and then it's a live chat. And I can say, hey, I'm getting rerouted. I don't think this is a legal reroute, or I have a question about it, and you will walk that person through. So that's
Correct.
in the moment, during business hours only, but in the moment help.
Yep.
That's correct. And we have a schedule alert that we're drafting right now, should be out within the next week. There's been a ton of improvements in and updates through the ACE for Unions app.
Awesome. Okay. Let's roll our sleeves up and dive in. So we're talking inverse assignments. Green slips are voluntary, inverse assignments are not. There's obviously going to be some coverage issues, right? We're not going to have the reserve coverage. If you're on reserve this summer, you're going to be worked. If you're on a line, you're going to be faced with reroutes. You're going to be faced with extensions. Even if you're on a green slip, you're going to be faced with all these issues. Kind of working backwards here, but, and Lisa, I want to get to you on fatigue, because that's the backstop, right? That's the circuit breaker of which you say, okay, I'm in a scenario that's no longer safe and I'm calling in fatigue, and we'll get there. But before that, with coverage issues, are there any PCS strategies for success? Let's talk moving X days, swaps, drops with the trip. There's not a lot of coverage. We know that there's strategies of individual vacation days, IVDs. You can use your APD, payback days. Where do you want to take that?
So the scheduling committee, we don't get into strategies. Honestly, we don't get into the different techniques. We are really just the truth data, like here is exactly how you can do it. And that's what's great about the scheduling reference handbook, and that plug to take it back there, is the fact that it breaks all that down, because the different PDs, APDs, IVDs, those are all different sections of the contract, and it's hard to read and it's hard to digest, and they're in all different sections. So the SRH actually really brings it down to a level where everybody can understand it, how to apply it. So the SRH does a great job of breaking that all down and making it as simple as possible. I will tell you that the PBS reference handbook, I know you asked PCS, but for PBS, the PBS reference handbook, it's worth its weight in gold, because it has a gazillion different techniques. It's great.
Where does that live?
Well, everything that we've talked about, the SRH, the PBS reference handbook, the schedule alerts, they're all on the MEC website. And they're also on everybody's tablets. So that everybody's EFB, all of that is on their tablets as well. So
Get on the iPad, the ALPA folder.
That's right.
Scheduling.
Yep. Same
PBS
thing.
stuff.
PWA is on there as well. Yep. And anytime you call your chief pilot, crew scheduling, crew tracking, pilot assist, you can feel confident that you reference any of those and they are legally binding.
Okay.
Absolutely legally binding.
So I know you don't offer tips or techniques or strategies here, but I do want to bring up some of the tools and we can just shout them out. But if you're trying to change your schedule, PCS, and you don't have the reserve coverage, which is affecting everybody, right? I fly a wide body and people say, well, it's not that bad. But when you are trying to get rid of a coverage trip or a coverage day that you didn't want or ask for because you're trying to go to a family reunion and you don't have the coverage, you're stuck. So now your quality of life just declined anyway. So things that could help: individual vacation days. You have your one APD per anniversary year,
right?
And then payback days, which you go into in one of your MEC alerts. So look back at those and use those to your advantage.
And I will also offer this: keep your requests in, even if the coverage looks terrible. So we all like blue coverage, which means it's positive, but the reserves required versus available. But even if it's black, keep it in, because the reserve staffing formula changes as it gets closer to the actual day. The formula changes. And so it's very possible that 3 weeks out, it's all in the black. But as it gets closer, that number can increase, or the required can go down and available can go up. And all of a sudden, something that's been denied for 2 weeks gets approved. Don't remove it.
Don't give up.
Just let it expire. Don't give up.
And it's also,
and also, if it's something that you absolutely have to have and you're out of options, you don't have the 25% coverage for an APD, or you don't have your APD, you don't have any more IVDs, Obviously PDs and bank payback days aren't working. Chief pilots are always a great resource. If it's something like it's my daughter's wedding and I just can't get it off, the worst they can say is no. But if you have no other options, then the chief pilot's office is always a good place to go and ask.
Let's talk green slips for a second. It goes through ARCOS, obviously seniority based. I think we're pretty familiar with how it works. Bringing up auto acknowledge and auto accept through iCrew. Can you talk to that? We have actually some darts that have asked, hey, can you do a podcast episode about this? And so here we are. What I'm familiar with is you go into iCrew and you say green slip request, and I say in base without conflict, and I want these dates or this particular trip. And then there's all these little questions of, you have to mark the box. Yes, I think they're auto-populated. No now. And then you have to go in there and say, yes, auto acknowledge, auto accept. The difference between those two, I think, are important because people are getting green slips on their line and saying, I wouldn't have accepted this.
Yeah. We have a schedule alert that explains in excruciating detail these two things, to include pictures and screenshots. So auto accept is there's the initial call out in ARCOS for green slips or white slips now. And that is right now, currently it's a 15-minute window. And so if you select auto accept, you're saying, put me in for whatever. I'm raising my hand for that. That is auto accept. So, which means that ARCOS is not going to call you. It's just going to go, okay, Ryan, we're putting you in for everything. And if you are awarded it, then it looks at the auto acknowledge and it will go, did he select yes or no? And if you selected yes and the schedule report is greater than 12 hours, then it will just show up on your schedule. You won't be notified. You won't get a phone call. You won't get a text. It just shows up on your schedule.
That's a great distinction. So auto accept says, I'm raising my hand for any green slip that comes in that meets my preferences. Auto acknowledge says, now put it on my line and you don't have to tell me. So if you select auto acknowledge, no, auto accept, yes, then you'll get a call with a 10 to decline.
That's
okay,
correct.
Great. Thanks for the clarity on that. Inverse assignments. Let's go there. Inverse assignments are voluntary. They're not required. There's some apparent confusion about that. We had some mayhem a couple of weekends ago. We don't have to go down that path, but what I would like to cover is an inverse assignment is meant to be just that. They go to the bottom of the seniority list in a category, and then they move to the top, and they're asking, hoping, they're fishing, right? They're fishing for someone to cover a trip that nobody wanted on a green slip or a white slip or anything else. So the bottom line is here, you are not required to answer your phone, to accept anything, to text message, anything. Even if a rotation shows up mysteriously on your line and you get a CNO notification, you are not required to call scheduling. That'll just go away.
100% true. You are not required whatsoever to acknowledge anything that they place on your schedule, as far as we're talking inverse assignments. So you're not required to acknowledge that. So if they can contact every single pilot in that category at one time. So what happens now is they'll blast it out to everybody. And really the first person to call back is who scheduling is going to tag with that. It's kind of a food fight. You're never obligated to answer your phone ever. But if you answer your phone and it's a scheduler on the other side and it's an inverse assignment, it is not a proffer. So if I had a suggestion, I would let that go to voicemail. I know there's a lot of issues with pilots. I get that. That's frustrating. If you pick up your phone, they've got you. If you call the company back and you say, hey, tell me about this inverse assignment, well, they've got you. It's no longer a proffer. So if you're going to call the company, or if you're going to pick up your phone from a 404 number, make sure that you're okay flying that inverse assignment, because there is value in that, right? There's a lot of value in flying inverse assignments. No green slip trigger, doesn't count as green slip. It's a premium pay without a green slip trigger. So if you want to fly that, there's value in that. So just be careful. But what you said, it's a proffer unless you actually answer the phone, which you're not required to.
Okay. And that's good to know. And so for the pilot who had the weekend off, wants the weekend off, you have something going on, you didn't put in for a green or white slip, you just want to be done. And then all of a sudden you see a rotation on your line and you get a text message from CNO, you've been assigned with the Y''D. You've been assigned rotation A606. Just ignore it. It'll go away.
That's right. It will go away. Yep.
Don't call scheduling.
Don't call
scheduling.
That's good. There's only one required schedule check in the entire contract, and that is for a reserve pilot at the end of their current rotation, 30 minutes after block in. Other than that, there's no requirement for them to acknowledge that whatsoever. And if you just ignore it, it will just go away. It magically just goes away.
Okay. You had a good segue. Reserve pilots are required to check their schedule within 30 minutes after blocking in. What is that schedule check for?
It's to see if you've been assigned something for the next day's flying. It is not to say once you've landed and you've shut down, no further expectation to fly, even as a reserve pilot, when you check the schedule, that does not mean that you can go right back out right then to another flight segment for that day. If they were going to do what we call tag on flying for reserves, which the company can do, they would have had to have notified you prior to top of descent of that segment that you had additional flying. So once you've landed, blocked in, checked your schedule, there's nothing. That schedule check is for a segment day, 12 hours later.
So reserve pilots check your schedule within 30 minutes after block in. It's for the next day or beyond next day, but it's not for tag on flying. And if there is something on there, they had to have notified you. And this goes for all pilots, right? For a reroute, you have to be notified prior to the top of descent.
Well, so regular pilots, 23L2B, cannot have tag on flying added to the end of the rotation, right? So even a regular pilot prior to top of descent, there's no tag on flying for a reg pilot. For a reserve pilot, prior to the top of descent, if they have another flight assignment that will fit within that duty period, they can assign that.
Okay, let's go into reroutes because here's the big one. We're going to see this a lot this summer. We've already seen it even in the shoulder season. We talked about tag on flying as a no-go. Reserve pilots are a hair different. A lot of questions come up with reroutes, or can they do that to me? How do you determine a legal or an illegal reroute? There's also notification questions. So we're all used to the ACARS message comes in, prints it out. You have to type in that silly code that says, yeah, I got the reroute and I acknowledge it. What are some other ways that they can notify you? Because this gets tricky, right?
Sure. Yeah. So generically, and let me just revisit the tag on flying thing for a moment. So what Frank said about both regular reserve pilots is absolutely accurate, but I just want to add one thing. For a regular pilot, they can ask you, hey, we have this tag on flying. Would you like to fly it? And you can say yes or no. You can say absolutely not. And if you say yes, it's actually premium pay for that tag on flying. But for a regular pilot, it is a proffer. And if they just assigned you something, you can walk away.
So hold the phone for a second. So I'm a regular pilot. I am headed back to base. I'm in Seattle, getting back to Seattle. When are they going to call me? When are they going to ask that? Is that an ACARS thing as well? Or is that like,
it could be. So let's talk about reroute notification, right? So there's a myriad of different ways they can do it. ACARS is what most people are familiar with. Critical phases of flight inside the top of descent, my opinion is as soon as you start your top of descent all the way till after shutdown checklist is complete, you're well within your right to ignore that. And there is an MEC alert that discusses this in great detail because it's critical phases of flight during that time, right? It shouldn't be the time that you're looking at a reroute to determine if it's legal, if you can accept it or not. So ACARS is typical what most people are used to. We've seen some very egregious violations where Tower will advise you,
what?
Hey, Delta 123, you've been rerouted, call your company on the ground. They're not Delta employees, not a legal reroute, certainly a safety of flight issue. I wish I was kidding, gear down inside the marker and that's happening. What we've seen a rise in lately, which is completely legal, is if you're taxiing in, let's say you're landing and Rank Tower says, hey, Delta 123, y'all have been rerouted. You'll get more information once you block in. That's a legal notification.
Because there's a Delta employee.
Delta employee.
So it has to be a Delta employee. What about a hotel?
Absolutely not.
Note under your door?
Nope. You can pick that up and you can ignore it. You can step over it. You can throw it in your trash can. Even if someone at the desk says, hey, Ryan, you've been rerouted, you're like, thanks, but no, I haven't, because they're not a Delta employee. It has to be a Delta employee. So a gate agent, when you open the door, assuming your flight duty period hasn't ended, you're walking back up and they say, hey, instead of you going to Nashville, you're going to Savannah, whatever that might be. That is legal notification as well. If you're showing up to the airport early, expecting a deadhead, and you haven't reached your scheduled report time yet, be careful, because if a gate agent or someone gives you that reroute, hey, you were deadheading home, but here's your reroute. You're now operating. Assuming you haven't gotten to your scheduled report time, that's legal reroute as well.
That's in the weeds. So the game you should play is, are you a Delta employee? And it's nuanced, right? The marshaler's not a Delta employee, right, but the gate agent is.
And it's tough to decipher.
Okay.
But the real takeaway is, if you had no further expectation of your aircraft movement, your flight duty period ends as soon as your brakes are set. So if you couldn't look at that reroute until after the brakes are set,
you're done.
You have zero obligation. As soon as you block in, set the brakes with no further expectation of aircraft movement, your flight duty period is done. We've seen some pretty egregious just within the last couple months where pilots will be at the curb waiting for the van. and crew tracking will call them and say, hey, we need you to come back into the airport and fly a flight.
And that's a no-go.
Or it's a no-go, but they do it
because they don't know anybody.
They don't know anybody.
That's a quick plug that I've got to make on behalf of the hotel committee. You can also listen to this on Hotel Motel Holiday Inn. That's episode 9. But contractually and in the FOM, if your transportation has not picked you up within 20 minutes from getting to the curb, then you're authorized and required to get your own transportation. You'll be reimbursed, right? You expense it. So if you are hanging out at the curb waiting and you get rerouted, it's an illegal reroute, but then you should be on your phone to get an Uber or a taxi to procure your.
It's not only just an illegal reroute. I want to foot stomps 2 things Shawn said. It's an FAR violation. If you're at the curb waiting to go to your hotel and you turn around and go back in the airport to fly, that's an FAR violation. Your flight duty period has ended. You cannot go fly. The second thing I want to foot stomp is if you're reporting for a deadhead only day and you show up at or after your report time, and the expectation is a deadhead only day, you cannot fly an airplane. It's an FAR violation. Now, if you show up 10 minutes before report because you got there early, you show up at the gate and the Delta employee says, hey, you're rerouted. You're going to fly this now instead of deadheading. That is legal. You reported early. They notified you of the said change. And so now you can fly that. But if it's at report or after changing you from deadhead to operate, and it was a deadhead only day, that's an FAR violation. And it happened as recently as Monday.
The different carriers actually have different rules about that too, because everybody has a different POI and different airlines have different interpretations.
Oh, okay. That's a good point.
Because you'll hear your buddies talking about it, just realize different carriers have different rules. So everything is
So don't compare notes with your friends.
exactly. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Good point. I feel the reroute horse has been beaten. Shall we move on? 23K recovery. This can be tricky again. First of all, 23K is a section of the contract that it's referring to. That's what they call it. Scheduling referred to recovery or 23K. How do I get into that scenario to begin with? How would I be eligible for 23K?
Very basic level. 1, you have to be a regular pilot. And 2, your rotation has to be affected by an IROP, which is defined in section 2 or 23, section 2A 149, I think it defines what an IROP is. And there's, I know
These guys are walking PWAs. I mean, they don't even have notes. They walked into the recording studio ready to roll.
nerds. I know we get great socks and we're nerds. So there are 9 different subsets of that definition. And it frustrates pilots because it's anywhere from, pilot sickness, equipment sub, different things like that. But it can't be just an IROP in the system. Delta will publish on DeltaNet. The Northeast is affected by a giant snowstorm. That's not an IROP. Like
Update your slip preferences. There's a nor'easter. Yeah.
or don't answer your phone, whatever you prefer. So if you get 1, you have to be a regular pilot. And 2, your rotation has to be affected by an IROP as defined in the contract. Not just because Delta said there's an IROP, but it has to be one of the very specific things that are outlined in the definition. That's from a very basic level. That's how you even get into that, into a potential.
So I'm a regular pilot and my rotation has been canceled or changed.
Or it might be just one of your flight segments has an equipment sub.
How do I know that I'm under 23K?
Couple different ways. I will tell you the most often misunderstood is pilots will see 23K on their schedule. Here's the sequence. And oh, by the way, another plug, this is in the SRH, as well as we have at least 2 schedule alerts, if not more, that detail everything that Frank and I are talking about right now for 23K. It goes through excruciating detail, frequently asked questions. I think it's at least 2 or 3 pages. What's the difference between no op and 23K on my schedule and things like that. So the progression, what you might see is you might see no op on your schedule. That's your first indication. If you're looking at your schedule, right? It's no op in your schedule, typically. Then a scheduler will replace the no op. And oh, by the way, don't look at your time card, because while they're doing all this, your time card is going to be completely messed up. So just wait for it to all go through. A scheduler will then go in and put you on what's called the recovery roster. And then they'll also mark your schedule with a 23K. That 23K on your schedule is simply a pay code. That doesn't mean that you do or do not have a recovery obligation.
So how do I know if I have a recovery obligation?
The easiest way, no kidding, is to call schedule, but we know that's difficult nowadays, right? The next easiest way is, and again, it's outlined in our schedule alerts, the specific ones for recovery, is to go into your reserve status. It seems counterintuitive, but even if you're a regular pilot, go into your reserve status into iCrew, reserve status. It will show you your rest. And there will be this one line that says NR, which means non-rest. What you'll see is a 6-hour window of non-rest. It just says NR, and it will be your original schedule report time plus 6 hours.
That's what you're on the hook for. You're essentially on short call.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And that's a point. So personal anecdote here. I had a flight out of Seattle, it was to Amsterdam. It no-opt before I commuted to Seattle. And I said, awesome. Trip's canceled. I'm getting paid. I'm not commuting to Seattle and I'm going to bed. And an hour later, I'm now going to Haneda on the same day at the same, within that 6-hour window. So now I've got to hurry up and get my shit together and then get to Seattle because I'm going to Haneda.
There I go.
Because I got a recovery obligation.
Yeah.
Totally legal. I, didn't even question it, but I was like, man, I should have commuted. I needed to be in position. Original scheduled report time plus 6 hours. You're on short call.
Right. Now they can schedule you something or assign you something well before that, but that's right. And 23K1 A, B, and C is actually pretty well written. It gives you the 3 situations you can be in, and the SRH, you break it down even further.
Okay. I don't want to get too far down the path here. If you have a rotation or a leg that is canceled or changed due to an IROP, you can expect that you have recovery obligation under section 23K.
Mm-hmm.
You can call the scheduler. You can look in iCrew under reserve
Status,
reserve status,
and arrest.
you can check that. Then you can look in the contract, 23K, A, B, and C. You can look at the scheduling reference handbook. You can get on ACE for Unions app and do a scheduling inquiry if it's during business hours and say, this is what happened. What are the expectations? But know that you're essentially on short call, originally scheduled report time plus 6 hours, be in position, be ready to roll. There's a way to get out of that, right? And this is where you agree with the company and you forfeit your pay for your original rotation, but they forgive that short call.
Right. And it's their discretion. So if they really need you, they're not going to release you. But 23K1G does allow you to call and say, hey, I know I got to give up my pay. Are you willing to, do you really need me? And they might say, no, Ryan, you're good. We'll release you without pay. And I'll also give it this 23J is worth its weight in gold. So I know you're talking about 23K, but if you're a regular pilot and you have a recovery obligation, Section 23J is a slip that you can submit that has to be at least 50% of the value of your original rotation. I'll give you an example here in a second. That still fulfills your recovery obligation for your original no-opt rotation. And you still get paid for your original rotation. So for example, let's say you had a 4-day that's worth 21 hours. And you just go, well, they're going to tag me with recovery flight. Because there's 2 games, right? You can either play the 23J game, which we're going to talk about. And it's really not a game. You can kind of set yourself up for success with 23J. Or you can just roll the dice and hope the scheduling doesn't call you. Nowadays, almost every recovery pilot gets called because
I see that
64 categories and open time's a mess for everybody. So there's a high probability, especially as we get into the summer, that if you have recovery, you're probably going to get something. 23J, you can go in and we said your original rotation was a 4-day worth of 21 hours. You can go in and find anything in this bid period or the next. Submit a 23J slip through PCS, and that's all in the schedule reference handbook, as well as schedule alerts. That's worth half that value, at least half that value. So if you find a 2-day that's worth 1030 and not a white slip, but a 23J recovery slip, you submit that and you get awarded for it. You have fulfilled your recovery obligation and you get paid 21 hours for flying 2 days.
So it doesn't have to match your original footprint.
Nope, at all.
In fact, it's a 4-day and you pick up a 1-day, you're square.
Correct. It can be over that footprint. It could be not over the footprint in that same bid period, or it can be in the subsequent bid period. And it fulfills, and it fulfills your recovery obligation for that, as long as it's at least 50% of the value of the original rotation.
Okay, that's a great.
And you're pay protected for the entire original rotation.
So big picture, 23K must fit in the original footprint of your rotation. 23J does not have to. 23J is an award, not an assignment.
Okay. Yeah, exactly right. So if you don't want to submit a 23J, which is well within your rights to do, and you roll the dice and you lose and they give you a 23K assignment, like Frank said, then it must fit within your original foot. It can't report any earlier than original schedule report, and it can't release any later than 4 hours beyond your original schedule release.
Okay. Confusing issue, but slow down.
Yeah. We have a schedule alert for this exact scenario too.
Yeah. Your alerts are great. They're awesome. In the moment, I know it's tough. People kind of freak out And so hopefully this will help direct you into that particular area. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about fatigue. We're going to go over calling in fatigue. What happens? What does it look like, smell like, feel like? We're going to talk about minimum rest requirements, layover requirements. That's all flight time, duty time with Lisa Nydahl. She's here. This is your summer survival guide. Back in 30 seconds.
Engage Podcast wants to hear from you. Send us your questions through the MEC DART system at dart.alpa.org. You have questions, we want answers. You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots.
You better check yourself or you wreck yourself, 'cause I'm bad for your health. I come real stealth.
Lisa, I want to turn to you. What is going on in your world? Flight time, duty time, fatigue. Tell me what's going on.
Well, we're seeing a very big increase on the FRB of fitness for duty reports. So far in 2022, year to date, we've had more fatigue calls than all of 2021 combined. The most common complaint that pilots cite is schedule construction, but the company is actually pointing to IROPS and weather and also rest interruptions at hotels due to what they think is the main complaint. And the last time I had a meeting with the company and I asked them about this drastic increase in fitness for duty reports and fatigue calls, they said, we can't control the weather, just blaming the weather and not actually schedule construction and what's going on as far as pushing pilots to the limits of their FTPs before they call in fatigued. As far as fitness for duty reports, in April of 2022, we had 406, which is our highest ever. March of 2022, we had 381. May is tracking to be on a similar number as April. So we're looking at about an 8 to 9 times increase in fitness for duty reports. So I guess it's good in a way that pilots are recognizing that they're fatigued and they are actually utilizing the fitness for duty report system. But on the other hand, it's actually not really good because we're running much more at redline than we were even back in 2019.
Wow. So an 800 to 900% increase in fatigue reports, which is, again, like you said, it's good because pilots are getting the message, they're understanding. However, the company's not really taking responsibility for fatiguing rotations. They're blaming IROPS, weather, things that are out of their control.
Right. And they've implemented some new mitigations that have been published. For example, one would be an 11-hour and 30-minute minimum layover. But I don't know about you, but there's a lot of pilots that probably think 10 hours wasn't enough, but 11:30 is. Certain cities that really might not be enough.
So since you touched on it, what is the bottom line on required rest? What does each pilot need to know?
Each pilot needs to know that the regulation states that you need to have an 8-hour sleep opportunity. That doesn't mean 8 hours behind the door. It means 8 hours after you've gotten nutrition, you've gotten ready for bed, you get into bed, and then that's when your sleep opportunity starts. And then it would finish, and then you get ready for work, and you might need nutrition again in the morning. And then you add in getting ready for bed, getting proper nutrition, getting ready for the next day, and then you get your 8-hour sleep opportunity. You add all of that up, and that would be your minimum. So it could be more than 10 hours, which is required if you have an issue with transportation or something like that.
And it sounds like it could also be different for each individual, right? If
Correct.
I've got a short ride to the hotel and I'm ready to go to sleep, I'm already fed and watered, and 8 hours is all I need, 9 hours, whatever.
Right.
But sometimes you're in a city, you've got a couple-hour van ride, you're still high strung because you just flew the Cat 3 down to minimums. You've got to debrief and think about this process. You might need a little more time. And if delays or IROPS encroach into that minimum rest that you particularly need, you need to make an adjustment. And who do you call for that?
You call the duty pilot and let them know when you're going to be rested.
Yeah.
And ready.
Not everybody knows that. I know. Lisa's looking at me like I'm crazy. She's like, well, you call the duty pilot. But that's a good point. If you have an issue with the hotel, you can work through the hotel staff. If not, you can call crew accommodations, use your iPad. But the duty pilot is hugely helpful for rest issues and extending those rests, and be directive. Say, I need 12 hours at this hotel. I'm not ready to report tomorrow until a particular time, right?
Correct.
Moving into calling fatigue, we just talked about, you call the duty pilot. But for those who are new to the podcast or new to calling fatigue, you call the duty pilot, calling fatigue, now what?
Okay, so your main point of contact, as you said, Ryan, is the duty pilot. So you're going to call the duty pilot, let him know you're fatigued, and he's going to say, when will you be rested and ready? And the minimum that he's required to give you is 10 hours off. So you need to decide what's going to work for you when you think you're going to be rested and ready for the rotation or to fly the next day. And then the duty pilot will put you immediately into rest, get you a hotel if you need it. And then you don't need to worry about anything else except for getting your rest. The next day, the options that the company have are getting you back on your original rotation, possibly deadheading you to another city to pick up that rotation, or deadhead you home with no further obligation. Those are the only two options that the company has. They're not allowed to reroute you to different flying per our recent MOU 2002. So you can either rejoin your original rotation or be deadheaded home with no further obligation.
Okay. And the company is saying, please do call fatigue when you've had enough. And this goes into episode 6. We did a 3-part series on scheduling and fatigue, rotation construction. You were a guest on the show, and we actually ran through a mock call, what it sounds like to call the duty pilot to call in fatigue. Episode 6, we say pilots as circuit breakers. So the company expects you to call in fatigue. Legally, FAR requires you to call in fatigued when you've had enough, right?
That's correct. You have a legal obligation to call in fatigued and stop the operation if you are fatigued or if you're not fit for duty. So it is your legal obligation. You shouldn't feel guilty or say, I want to finish this mission. What about these passengers? You have to actually look at you and how you feel, because fatigue is an individual pilot decision. It's no one else's. So you have to look at the signs of fatigue, see if you're missing radio calls, see what's going on. Are you not catching things that you might have caught before? Are you feeling groggy? Accidentally taxi out with the flaps up? A lot of those might be signs of fatigue. So you really have to look at what's going on with you physically, mentally. You have a legal obligation to stop the operation, call the duty pilot and say, I'm fatigued.
And you're pay protected.
Correct.
There's no questions asked. You fill out a report, you get paid.
Mhm.
It's handled. Okay. We've seen a spike in pre-rotation fatigue calls. However, when you have a number of rotations, this is particularly applicable to reserve pilots, right? When you've had rotation linked to rotation where you've had maybe 12 or 16 hours off at home, and they're different rotations, but you're coming off of 2-3 day trips, and then scheduling puts you on another 2-day trip, and you're just saying, I'm done. I'm cooked. I can't fly this rotation. So now you call in fatigue pre-rotation, but that's within the company's control and you're protected there as well.
Yes, generally that would be paid under flight pay.
Yeah. And I think it's important just to bring that up because people don't necessarily think about fatiguing rotation after fatiguing rotation, and it's cumulative, it's chronic. And you're trying to wake up the next morning saying, man, I've just flown 2 rotations. They were both fatiguing. I got minimum rest in my own home. I'm not really ready to fly this next trip. That's a fatigue call as well.
Absolutely.
What about when you have a rotation that on paper is legal, but you're looking at it, you're feeling it, you're living it, and you realize this is just not practical or safe? Is that a fatigue call as well?
Yeah, absolutely. You're required to report rested for your assigned duties. And if at some point you just feel fatigued and you don't feel like you can finish those assigned duties, that's definitely a fatigue call.
Okay. We've talked a lot about scheduling things, green slips, reroutes, 23K, a number of things that will contribute to you being fit for duty for you to show up and fly a flight. What about extensions? What's the bottom line? The company asks you to accept an extension. Do you have to accept an extension?
No, absolutely not. And prior to our MOU 2002, a fitness for duty report was required when you declined an extension. Ever since May of 2020, when that MOU was signed, there is no requirement for you to fill out any paperwork whatsoever anymore to decline an extension. And you don't have to give the company any information as to why you're not accepting that extension.
And it comes up on ACARS, right? It'll proffer an extension and you just say no.
That's right.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And there's no questions asked. There's no pay issues.
Nope. No pay issues at all. You will still be paid. And you don't even have to give a reason why you're not extending. That's something to keep into consideration when you actually do extend is how fit am I for my duty? What happens if some weather comes up, some maintenance comes up, we have a medical issue, and am I going to be asked question as to why did I extend? You have to think about that when you're making that decision to extend.
And we've had a number of situations where pilots have extended and they say, well, I'm already loaded up. The passengers are on. We're ready to go. We're just on a delay. So I'm willing to extend. But you're accepting a lot of risk. You're accepting what's going to happen and you don't know. And we're on wide bodies, right? And this happens often where you haven't flown your 10-hour flight yet and you feel good. You've got your coffee in your hand and you're ready to roll and you're delayed. And the company that asks you to extend, and you say, yeah, we'll extend, but you don't know what's going to happen in 10 and a half hours when you arrive in Haneda or Amsterdam. It could be Cat 3 down to minimums. It could be medical and route. It could, all these factors add up. And so you don't know how you're going to feel. So it's easy to say yes to an extension at the beginning of an FDP when you feel good, but you don't know. You're, again, accepting that risk at the end, right?
That's very true. You really have to look hard at accepting an extension and what possibilities could come up, because you don't want to be having your feet to the fire and being asked questions by the FAA as to why you extended and then had an issue at the end of the flight.
I just looked up before the podcast here. It seems that the FAA's view of extensions is that it's under extenuating circumstances that a pilot would extend. They don't view it as this is just normal operations to get the mission done or get the flight done. So if there's a mishap or something happens, or even you miss a taxiway, the finger is going to be pointed at you as to why you extended. The company's going to say, hey, we just offered and they accepted it.
Yeah, that's true. And, you as the pilot command have to look at all the possibilities that could come up. And at Delta, we're a very mission-oriented pilot group. So we like to complete the mission. We don't want to let anyone down. But what you have to do is have your own back and just make sure that you're going to be able to run a safe operation for the entirety of that flight.
This came in through a pilot submission through a DART, but can a pilot be routed into an extension?
No, absolutely not. That's not legal.
I'm not even sure I understand the question. So the company would say, hey, you're rerouted, but I need you to extend in order to accept the reroute?
They might not necessarily say that you're going into an extension, but then you get the message, that the ACARS message 15 minutes before the extension acceptance is required. And now all of a sudden you're not legal. That is not a legal reroute.
So if you get a reroute and you look at your FDP and you say, I can't do this without an extension, the answer should be a flat no.
Absolutely.
Okay. You've heard it here.
And I would also like to give a plug for the FAR 117 hotline as well. Call the FAR 117 hotline, which is 1-800-USA-ALPA, and someone will pick up that line immediately, 24/7, 365.
Okay. Awesome. You mentioned it earlier in the podcast, and actually this was part of one of our episodes on the fatiguing rotations, part of the 3-part series. I believe it's episode 4. You should check that out. We talked about the fatigue mitigation parameters that were super top secret and the company didn't want anybody to know. And now everybody knows about it. Your committee, flight time, duty time, and FRB, you review these fatiguing rotations and you notify the company. You say, hey, these aren't going to work. These aren't safe. These aren't practical. Yet they are still making it into the bid package, right?
Yes. So that's the fatigue risk management's team, which I am the chair, and we meet with the company monthly. We have several volunteers that go through all of the bid packages on a monthly basis. We see if they're meeting these 28 fatigue mitigations. If they are not meeting those mitigations, we pull them out and we identify them. We also identify fatiguing rotations that might meet the fatigue mitigations that we have in place. Just because they meet the mitigations doesn't mean they're not fatiguing. They might have serious circadian swaps, which is a very big concern for us right now. They might have other fatiguing issues, such as you're flying a leg before a red eye, but the company doesn't necessarily consider it a red eye. So the fatigue risk management team and the company have 2 different ways of identifying a red eye. So if you're flying from LA to Raleigh-Durham and you land at 04:59, well, if you're West Coast based crew, that flight is not considered a red eye by the company, but the fatigue risk management team does consider that a red eye. So we will bring up rotations such as that to the company on a monthly basis. And during our meeting, occasionally the company will say, okay, we'll change this. But for the majority of the time, they do not change the rotations.
So I want to be clear. You are presenting to the company specific rotations that you feel are not practical. They're potentially not safe to fly, that they would potentially be fatiguing to fly. And they say, thanks for your input, but it's still going in the bid package.
That's correct.
And then I understand you are going to start publishing those fatiguing rotations to the pilot group each month to say, hey guys and girls, if you are awarded this rotation, you should use caution or you should have a closer look at it.
Right. So for this month, it's going to be our first monthly publication at the end of May. We'll publish a monthly comm saying, this is not an all-inclusive list. Fatigue is an individual pilot's decision. We're not saying to call in fatigue on these rotations, but what we're saying is this is the list of the rotations that we considered fatiguing that we gave to the company, and they chose not to change them. So if you happen to be flying one of these rotations, just watch yourself. Make sure that you are not showing the signs of fatigue. And if you end up being fatigued, to call in fatigued.
I see Frank's tapping his foot. He's been foot stomping all day. This is a foot stomp. If your rotation is on the rotations list, you should probably take a closer look.
That's correct.
Lisa Nydahl, chairman of Flight Time, Duty Time, and a million other things. Thanks for being here. Shawn, Kellett, Frank Wedding, scheduling committee. Good luck this summer.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
This has been Engaged, the podcast for Delta pilots. Thanks for listening. My name is Ryan Argenta. Stay safe and keep the rubber on the road.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is